And suffice to say, you'll all get a copy of the recording as well as the slide deck and a couple other resource materials we hand out. I'll be doing a lot of the talking. Marianne will jump in because she often corrects my mistakes, but also she's there to answer questions in the chat. So that's the way we'll do the back and forth a little bit, is in the chat. So please, if you have a question, doesn't matter what question, just ask it. If you want some clarity, things like that, ask it, and we'll repeat what we said. We go through this pretty fast. I have a deck I'm going to work from, but every once in a while I'll pop out just to see everybody. But here we go. And hold on. I had everything ready. There it is. So here we are, June 6th. How time flies. I'm Rob Kershaw, Director of Public Workshops here at Story Center. I think I alluded to, I've been doing this work since I took a workshop kind of on speculation and kind of curiosity. I was working in northern Arctic communities in northern Canada, supporting communities up there, doing websites and books and finding ways for them to find alternative ways for them to share stories amongst themselves and to other communities in the area up in the Sahtu, but also on websites worldwide. And I heard about digital storytelling from someone just happened to be passing through the Little Fly-In community and said, you should check out the Center for Digital Storytelling. And I did. And when I extricated myself out of the Arctic, I drove to Berkeley, California, where I now live, took a workshop, and I've been doing this work pretty well ever since. Shifted my focus quite a bit. I was able to go back up into the Arctic and do digital storytelling there, which was one of my goals. Marianne, want to say hello and who you are?
Yes, I'm Marianne McNair, and I started this work as a museum educator at a history museum, and I invited Story Center to come in and help me with a couple of workshops where we produced digital stories and kind of flipped the tables, and instead of me telling people their history, had them tell their own history, and included that in the exhibits on a big screen on the wall on a little side room. And it was so amazing to watch people's reactions to that I just kind of jumped ship and did this. But so I was a museum educator for, I don't know, 25, 28 years, and I've been doing this for the last 12, 13 years. So I'm a convert for sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the takeaway is you might be giving up your day job if you get hooked by digital storytelling. All right. So here's a little rundown of what we're going to try and cover today. There'll be a lot of weight on our process and what we call digital storytelling and how we go about doing it. I think that's what most people are interested in. There's so many different ways that digital storytelling can integrate into different, down different avenues, whether it's in higher ed or it's in public health. But the core of our work and the process is malleable, and it's been tried and true. We've been doing this work now, as Story Center since 1993. So very early on in the .com era, Joe Lambert, who is in the picture as you look to the right with the goatee, that's Joe Lambert, is Nina Mullen and Dana Atchley founded this back in the day, like things like community digital drop-in centers where people could make websites, they could make little stories or films. It was very, like a clubhouse in the Mission District of San Francisco. But Dana actually came to this work specifically as a media artist. He's the one sitting on the stump, where he would put these little vignettes of his family's history, as well as his own traveling exploits as he moved around the United States in his van, performing live, and just the characters he met, the places he went to, and put these very short little pieces together using his own photographs, his family archive of home movies. And people were fascinated because the stories were kind of, it was the early days. It was before This American Life and all this sort of in the Moth, but people were really interested in these very, very sort of specific little moments in life, but also the fact that back, now almost 30 years ago, he was able to put them together in these little slideshows, movies, and he would narrate them live. He also had ones where he would record his voice over them and they would sit on his website, Next Exit. But it was the fascination of this combination of the miniature, the smallness, and yet how much that revealed about human character. And also the fact that he was putting things together very early when, personal computers were just coming into play and the technology was clunky. He was working behind the scenes at the American Film Institute, where the Story Center ran their very first workshop at the American Film Institute in 1993. And as they say, the rest is history. And this genre and Story Center has grown. We have I think it's like our 10th international conference coming up in England this month later on. It was on a 3-year hiatus for reasons I don't think I need to say why, but it's back. So it's just a fascinating world of helping, supporting people, telling their own stories, which is kind of what, let me just advance my slides. What digital storytelling has become. Dana was using it as his sort of performance art, but it's evolved into this way of approaching a different kind of qualitative assessment and inquiry to people from all walks of life and professionally and otherwise. The other thing is just going through some definitions is in our work, and I know there's some people here that maybe are more sophisticated in media production, but our work is really about, the quality in the sort of low band broadcast and the amateurness and giving a kind of voice in this particular digital media voice to the unschooled in that capacity. I don't have a background in film. I have a degree in ecology and communication studies. I worked on oil rigs for 7 years, and I worked as a ranch hand for 4 and ran a small town newspaper, right? It's that kind of, it brings a lot of who we are in our totality into this work. And it's not a specialist, it's more of a generalist approach. But as a result, the digital stories are short, they're personal, whether it's the I pronoun or it's some other way of how we want to voice our own experience. But that's the key, is the storyteller, the ones with the lived experience, get to explore those experiences and sharing them using the combination of their voice, images, video clips, and so forth. As I said, they're short, partly because of the practicality. We run our workshops knowing that people have busy lives and other professions, and that digital storytelling sometimes feels like a privilege and some icing on the cake, and then being really interesting in these last 2.5 years through a pandemic, how people have carved out some time to find moments to express themselves. It's been a really interesting moment for Story Center to be part of people sharing their lived experiences through a pandemic. So this idea that it takes a lot to make a big film. It still takes a lot of our own energy to make a short film, but it's in that sort of miniatureness that we find the kind of diamond in the rough. So I love this quote, take it for what it's worth, from the writer Leah Papura about the miniature. And that's sort of the way I feel about it. They're kind of diamonds that glow, and they're also transportable. So where does this fit? Where does Story Center in this idea of facilitated workshops? Because that's what we do. We help people tell their stories. As Marianne said, after doing museum work where she was taking information and creating stories of others, what did it feel like to facilitate people making their own stories, making their own films? And so part of that is in this taxonomy, what I call this sort of pyramid of media practices. It goes from consumption at the very bottom to, at some point, we're actually producers. And it's really part of, at least for me, the excitement is watching people flip that, whether it's young, adults in high school, But even people that maybe had only never made anything creative in a long, long time, through just some facilitation, we'll go through that process, make media. And so the flipping from consumer to producer. And we find ourselves kind of right below the do-it-yourselfers. Hopefully, in some ways, through our work, people take that initiative and are inspired to continue on making their own work or supporting others making their own stories. So a few more definitions. I love this quote by Dr. Eleanor Oakes. This idea that, at least in our work, because they're first-person narratives, they live in the world of lived experience. What we notice with the storytellers is they're not just trying to describe something. They're not just trying to give us information about something in their experience. They're navigating that experience themselves. They're thinking about what that experience means to them, why it's important to them, and what part of that experience do they want to share out. So it's this combination of giving shape to the experience for ourselves, and in doing that, we decide what experience to share and how to share it, what to say, what not to say. And I think this by Eleanor Oakes sort of captures that. All our stories, I would say, right down, everyone is in some ways about a relationship to a person, an adversary, a place. Right? You can just think about our experiences when you're relating them to friends at the cafe. You know, you're navigating that. You're navigating the relationship with the person across the coffee table and trying to figure out what to say in the moment to that person, right? About the experience you had on the way to the coffee shop, or 10 years ago that you're trying to, make amends to that person across. So you're always navigating that space between yourself, someone else, or some other place. We're going to see some digital stories in a moment, and they're a product. They come out of a process and they sort of stand alone, as Marianne says, that one she was talking about with the parent with dementia. I think it was dementia, but this idea that at the end of a process, there's a product, there's a story, there's this artifact. But through this work, where that comes through, it's again, because we're not professionals, it really is in how that space is held, how people are invited in to share an experience, to discover something about themselves, to discover how to put things together. So the process is so key. At the end, we screen these stories. They're 3 minutes long, but in our in-person workshops, it's 3 days of 24 hours of sort of intense group work, like a kind of worker space. Online, it's over a 6-week period of 2 hours a week. That is key. That piece at the end does not just appear out of a vacuum. It comes through a series of steps that we help the storyteller navigate. So where do these steps start? So let's break down the workshop. Again, if I'm going too fast, or there's something you're have a question about just in that sort of preamble, please put it in the chat. So, Story Center, formerly the Center for Digital Storytelling, people work in the digital, on a computer with digital media. Yet, I love this quote by our founder, director Joe Lambert, that listening is the core technology. The key to both being a better storyteller, a better creator of stories, producer of films, and certainly to be a facilitator, is you have to be a listener. You listen first, tell stories after. And it's that, because we're learning through the listening, right? We learn through others, and stories are that way of transferring knowledge from one to another. And the only way we do that is we listen. And you think about the times as a teenager, I didn't listen and I made the mistakes. If I had been listening to the stories, to the recounting of ways to do it in the experiences of others, whether they're teachers or people I met on my travels, I'd probably be I'd probably still doing what I'm doing. But this idea of listening as a core technology is so key to our work as facilitators. And we hope we impart that on people that take our workshop. We all become better listeners out of this process. So when we listen, it creates space. There's no interruptions. It opens up space for people to reflect. to query about themselves, to think about what others are saying. How does what other people are saying impact me? Does that make my experiences the same, different? Do I relate? Do I sort of step aside? Right? So listening leads to reflection. And from reflection becomes a way to sort of like get thoughts down, like gather thoughts, create focus. And so there's always a bit of writing in our workshop. And writing doesn't mean it's a creative writing class. It just means we want people to find something that's in their head, the reflective, like pull it down somewhere into their body and express it some way. I've watched people take the reflection, and we're going to talk about how we do that through a story circle process in a minute, to scribbling on a page, making like little drawings, right? Because that's their expression of, and maybe with some words, some bullet points, some speak bubbles, things like that. But there's some way to get it out of in our head, to get it down and out. Because once you have something out, you're going to record it. So that piece of writing, it's a script, it's a letter, it's a shopping list, becomes a way of voicing it, because we need to get it not only out from your head down somewhere into a core of experience that you want to express, and then we're looking for people to express it. What is the voice? How do we say things, right? And then we say things differently than we write things. So it's just this way to get people to feel comfortable in their own skin and their own voicing of their experience. And once they have that voice, that's the foundation, at least in our foundational workshop, is once they recorded them speaking a script or a creative essay or reading a poem or reading a letter to a loved one, an apology, they build up from that. So the voice recording is the foundation part of the digital story. And from there, they add images, video clips, text, and if so be it, they maybe add a soundtrack. And at the end, they have this 3-minute piece that includes their voice, photographs that they have taken or have chosen out of their collection of memorabilia, possibly a piece of music that is meaningful to them, and then they export it as a short little film. And always we celebrate. All our workshops, everybody completes the story, and we honor that completion through a little screening. I won't go through that. That's just breaking that 4-step process down even more. And these are things over a 6-week online experience or an in-person experience. You will go through all of these. We will sort of focus in on the 7 steps and a little bit about the story circle, because that's sort of the key group process. A lot of the other stuff is facilitated and supported as people work then independently. Once you have your voice recording, you've done a story circle sharing where you've sort of thrown your idea out there, or read maybe a script and had your storytelling peers reflect back what they've heard, ask questions to allow you to further that writing, to shorten that script, to focus that story. The rest becomes, in a group process, still you working individually through the creation of your digital story. Marianne, anything that I'm missing at this point? Maybe
no, you're hitting everything spot on.
Okay,
great. Yeah.
I'd be remiss not to mention our ethical practice when people are sharing personal experiences. There's a kind of a risk reward. It feels a little cliche, and but there's this sort of element, and you can feel it in the room, where people take one extra step forward. They go, there's this story, but this is the one. This is the pebble in the shoe. This is the thing that I'm trying to get to. And we know that little step forward from the safety, especially of our working lives, with our colleagues, even with our family, when we are sharing experiences and trying to tap in and connect to that adversary, or really affirm that, no, we're never going to see eye to eye on this, but that's a risk. And as facilitators, as a process, we need to honor that. We need to really be paying attention to everybody's well-being, the individual and the individual within the group. And so there's ways, I won't go into it. And if you take our certificate program or a facilitator training program, we break that down. We're not therapists by any means. There is an element of release when you make a story, just as any creative endeavor would do. But we just are very aware of it. And there's ways that we work in that space. I will also be sending out this sort of 6-step ethical practice, or 6 bullet points of ethical practice, is a document, and I'll be sharing that out along with the recording later on today. But through that, people need to know where they're heading, right? We don't want people to be going in blind and just navigating by themselves. This is a facilitated process, meaning people will have questions. They don't trust their own instincts. They've never made this before. They don't think they have any story that's important. Nobody cares about my story. All the other stories are better and more important. So we need to keep them informed and supported moving forward, and that they know where they're heading. Part of that is the informedness, is that they own it. At any given time, they can take a right turn and escape out of that story and tell the safer one or the different one. That they, even if they had some feedback and they're at some point, no, that's not sitting with me, I'm pulling back. I don't want to tell that story, even though maybe through some kind of collaboration with the facilitator, they were working towards something. So it's really key. And there's a lot of different ways we do this in the workshop to keep that ownership. The hands off, trying to keep fingerprints off is hard to do when you're facilitating. But we really want people to sort of venture forward, and only when they need it, we throw a lifeline. Local relevance. So in this world of diversity, we want to make sure that this is a lot for our custom work and our public workshops. We have a diverse staff as well as contract teachers, but it's just who's available. In our custom work that we do, custom programming, we work with the community. People in leadership roles in those communities have actually a place in the workshop. The facilitators of the workshop aren't the leaders of communities. We come in to support whatever leadership in those communities is asking for, whether it's in a school environment or some kind of community health center environment. That when people come into a workshop, they know that our roles are just what are assigned to us as facilitators, and that there's other people that they can go to for the support that they need. That includes if we're doing some trauma-informed narrative work, that there is that support in the room, that knowing support of public health officials, and not officials, but practitioners and health providers are in the room, and that people know who they are. We also want to make sure that ethics is a process. This is very key. That I know there's institutionalized ethics programs, but in our work, it's been really interesting to watch how that isn't the container that necessarily holds community story work. So we really have to be adaptable to the needs of who's in that room, and what that relationship of the people in the room is happening. And ethics of distribution, this idea that at the end there's a little film that people can do whatever they want with, and that's the key, is their story. Story Center is not a broadcaster. We have consent forms if we would like to use that story as a teaching example. The ones you see we'll be watching today are such, but we are not a broadcaster. We're not here. We're not NPR. We're not making it for some output. Now the program or the organization we're working for may be, so that consent and negotiating between storytellers and that organization needs to be agreed upon. And even then, in our world, the storyteller can opt out at any given time. I've had stories, we've had them on our website. They've given us permission, but life changes and they've asked to take them down, and we do that. All right. And there's all sorts of issues around distribution, and people need to be aware that once it's online, it's kind of has a life of its own. I know in our YouTube channel, we have turned off, and I see it a lot more now, that commentary is turned off. So you give up sort of that activity that creates profile and directs people to your YouTube channel or whatever, but you opt out of that because you want to honor the story and the safety and the sacredness of that story. As I said, the stories are run the gamut of what people want to talk about. But it's always in relationships. It's a loved one. It's an experience. A stranger came to town, or I went on vacation, the metaphor of that, right? This idea that we, as through life, we have lived experiences that alter who we are and how we think of the world and think of others, big and or small. And as a result, people explore that. And they, especially now with digital media being so pervasive and our phones taking pretty good video and photographs, we document everything. We're seeing such an array of production values and inputs. Going back to Dana Atchley, that was using sort of old home movies, like 16mm home movies, and the photographs he was taking and scanning them. You can imagine now that a lot of things now are in this high definition environment. That said, like the top middle picture, people also can re-explore that Polaroid or that photo album or the objects in a drawer and what they mean and how do they, you know, getting the visual artifact into a digital form and using that as a visual means of expression. So it's been fascinating to watch the evolution of the form. So let's watch a couple, and then we're going to talk a little bit of what we call the 7 steps, sort of the foundation to really how these stories have come about in our workshop. Where do they start? How do people even just start what seemingly is a blank canvas of an idea, you know, not even necessarily an idea, and certainly an idea that ends up into a computer, a box that you work in with keys and mouse pads, and a program that we've never used before. How do these stories emerge? So let's watch White Tarantula. The 3 I picked are 3 that were made in the last 2 years. This is one of the first ones in one of my first online workshops in June 2020. So, you know, fresh out of the UK in a lockdown environment. And that's all I'll say. Please, as you're watching, if you have comments, we won't have time to sort of like break it down to its component parts, and Teti isn't here, but, you know, affirming what you saw, you know, things that struck you in a certain way, you know, what resonated, please put those in the chat, see if we can capture those. Maybe Marianne or I would read some of those out. Here we go.
This is a story of a special place, a place I've gone to ever since I can remember, a place that's quietly contradictory, both strangely silent, yet bursting with the possibility of words. Maybe that's why I like it. You might recognize it if I tell you it starts with a blank page and a pen. My father tells me that when I was a young child, around 3 or 4 years old, before I could even write, I found a small empty notebook in his office and a pencil, and then proceeded to fill it from the very first page with rows and rows of scribbly lines. He describes the scene in detail, me quietly babbling away to myself, perfectly content and focused on my self-determined task. He watches as I continue, page after page after page, all the way to the end. Over the years, he tells this story many times. He tells it to make a point when we're all together as a family, accompanying it always with his strong, hearty laugh, his proud, beaming grin. He's happy he has this story, a story that for him captures who I am. I've often returned to my father's story. This telling of my first attempt at writing becomes a story in my memory too. I return to it because I wonder if what it says is true. Do I see myself through his eyes or through mine? I wonder about this now as I sit and stare at the blank page. I wonder as I think back over the last 20 years where stories have followed me, but where my pen has again and again fallen out of ink. My secret place becomes a no place. I watch now as black marks slowly appear on white, marks that you may see too, you who are with me now, listening to my story. A few weeks before lockdown I had a dream. I dreamt of a white tarantula. I was walking through a room filled with gigantic overhanging cobwebs. I pulled them back as if pulling back the curtains of an unknown theatre. I wasn't afraid, more so overwhelmed by a feeling of calm curiosity, a quiet questioning. What was this place? Then, suddenly, she appeared, jumping out at me from the shadows, her distinctive form giving me a short, sharp shock. I felt the sting as she bit into my flesh just above my hand, and I knew I'd been poisoned. Time slowed down, and I waited for the poison, like black ink, to spread through my veins. I woke, startled, eyes wide open, the knowledge that all would never be the same clinging to me, the image of her, a white tattoo imprinted like a light in the darkness. Instinctively, I felt above my wrist to check for the bite, and then I realized with a cold clarity why she had come. After many years of silence, I must return to my father's story, to the place where I began. Watch as I pick up my pen and write.
Take a moment just to see if there's anything people want to write in the chat.
Somebody says it's more like a visual poem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of times, in the sort of the brevity, how do we, we're going from sort of autobiographical, chronological. We're going to talk about this idea of moments and scenes, and that's a different kind of writing. There is a poetic nature to digital storytelling. The distillation, the attention to the brevity and the voicing, right? Heaven forbid that people read their term papers. That's not what digital storytelling is. The nonlinearity, very important, I think, in making visual digital stories, right? If you start, and I was born, trying to navigate that through to where the story actually is landing and where the change is. Linearity is again, going back to brevity and storytelling. We do it all the time in stories. The storytelling is very circuitous.
And Star talks about the use of black and white imagery when memories are coming in. I think that's really.
And there was a conscious decision on that.
Yeah.
Like some of those photos were color, and she just desaturated them in the video editing program. Great. So there's a lot to these 7 steps. The couple of main things to take away is this is not an assembly package. The 7 steps is not, you're not building a Billy bookcase, right? You're not putting together a piece of furniture. So the idea of the steps is only because digital storytelling, or being creative, is a journey. It's very nonlinear. You have to sort of start where you feel most comfortable. At some point, you have to sort of cross over that hurdle that's the most intimidating. And when you do that and how you do that doesn't necessarily go in any particular order. Everybody does it slightly differently. But these are the 7 main points. And at any given time of you doing a digital story, you're going to be visiting these. You're going to thinking about the things which aren't always the things that as the one that's going, I'm going to teach you what I know. So a lot of times the stories are about, and even there's a little bit in Teddy's about not sure. That knowing that you're not sure about something is just as important as knowing I'm the expert, right? So a lot of times the stories of insight are not about the expertise. It's about something slightly underneath that. It's being insecure about that, the expertise, or nobody actually trusting that you're the expert. So the insight is coming from something, not just of the experience. And that's because the things that people tell stories about, what we tell story about that are meaningful, is is that sort of thing. They are really important to tell. There's an emotional component that experience. If I was going to say anything about my life, I'm going to tell these moments because I can't leave them on the cutting room floor. They have to be part of me telling things about who I am. And they're emotional. Doesn't mean they're angry or sad, or you have to express yourself angrily, but it gives you that permission to share something. It's like, no, I could say this, but what you really need to know about me is this. And even as I say that with some sort of performance, you hear it, that I'm saying it because, darn it, it's important. That's emotion. So this idea of what you know and what you feel about what you know, why it means something to you, is part of what you're trying to convey in your story. And our experiences are happen in time and place. You know, Teddy talks about, it moves around back to when she was a girl at 6, but she's also talking about, you know, just before lockdown and having this sort of inability to be creative, and so something was going on, and having a dream, right? There's these little moments that she stitches together to create what feels like, and for me is, a coherent piece of expression. We hear her voice, we hear the accent, we hear the pacing, we hear the things that she wants to emphasize. We hear her daughter talking to the dog, and that was her choice. She had a little bit of video of the bookcase. She was really interested in what she was looking at in lockdown. You hear the daughter in the background. She decided to keep that in. It's this sort of moment of, what does that mean? Yeah. But it puts us in the live space. You hear things. There's this music that she got from WeVideo. And she starts to assemble everything together. You know, how do you do a white tarantula dream sequence? Well, she found black and white little video clips in WeVideo. She experimented with that, and all of a sudden it all came together. And then it all came together. So at some point, there's a commitment to a script, poem, letter, as I said earlier, recording it in a way that feels the vocal expression. And now you have to sort of build up around that. And so you can see how Teddy did that. I'm not going to go through these. These are just thoughts around all the 7 steps, that how they fit into the reflection, the writing, and such. So let's watch another one. This is another one that was done. This was done by a Canadian at a custom workshop, actually, that we did with faculty at Rhodes University, I think, in Victoria, British Columbia. You can sort of see some similarities to this. Again, a lot of these stories, because they're locked down, people were at home looking at the walls in their apartment or their house.
Don't tell me how it ends. The story about the little boy who was sent to children's prison because he says everything twice. Jacob Tutu Meets the Hooded Fang by Mordecai Richler. It's a book that has haunted me for more than 30 years now. I read it when I was 10 and never again since. But I remember there being a small, sketchy drawing of 6-year-old Jacob completely naked in the prison shower. It was frightening and attractive. What was happening to him? We all have our prisons. At 10, I was in a children's prison called Grade 5. The kids called me Half and Half and sang a little ditty about me being half man, half woman to the tune of a 1980s hair commercial. I could only dream of having the hooded fang to guard me, an alarmingly sized professional ex-wrestler in a silk robe. After that, I spent decades putting myself in a different kind of prison. Now I'm a writer. I write a lot about the kinds of creatures who tend to disappear. Mostly 2-in-1 creatures, tutus, half and halves. I had resisted the urge to track down the original book all these years, as a small but reverent nod to disappearance. But to be truthful, I'm also nervous that my sketchy, dreamy resemblance to Jacob will also disappear. I don't even know for certain that drawing of him in the shower is actually in the book, or if I just made it up. Here's one I drew just the other day. I've ordered the book, and now it's sitting here in front of me. And I'm wondering what to do. Do I look? At some point, I looked in the mirror to see I'd slipped past my childhood taunt of half and half. Either way, I hope I'll always be able to write like that drawing. Something is happening, likely irrevocable, but not being able to make out quite what. Don't tell me.
Again, I'll just take a pause for the comments. You know, there's something about the intimacy of that, just seeing the writing desks, what's on the bookshelf. And, you know, kind of, I don't know if it's vulnerability, but there's just sort of this the witnessing and being, it's almost like we're in the room with Allie and they're just speaking to us. I think that's sort of, if you listen to these stories, you know, Teddy's, it never feels written. I mean, there's some beautiful writing, some beautiful phrasing, but at some point it just becomes the way they're talking. And in this case, it feels like Allie's talking to me. I'm in the apartment. I'm there in the room and I've seen them for myself. I'm seeing the things around, what's hanging on the wall, what's on the bookshelf, what's on the writing desk, the strange little metal thing that his thumb is through, right? And so that sort of sense of stories that feel intimate, and there's an authenticity to it. It's not performative. It's not a writing exercise. It's not overly descriptive. It's not an expertise. It just feels very, very natural and in the space. And, you know, that's what storytelling is. It's sort of this feels one-to-one. And if you can get that, then you're off to a good place.
And Rob, I just wanted to add to that. I think people are kind of sensing this, but haven't said it yet. The storytellers aren't telling us what we should learn from their story. They're letting us figure it out, right? And that's engagement with audience when you let us take what you're giving us, whether it's the visuals or the words or the combination of the two, and letting us try to make sense of it. And so that's when stories do that, there's a real beauty to them because they engage us, they allow us to participate, and they invite us in. And I think that's why I really love digital storytelling, is it's not all spelled out in black and white and tied up with a bow at the end.
Yeah, there's almost that question at the end of Allie's story, you know, of wondering. So that, you know, that we talked about hearing voice being critical, you know, hearing the voice or how someone expresses themselves and phrases, the way that their voice sounds and the uncomfortableness of that. If you've never recorded your voice, we always feel this sort of discomfort with the sound of our own voice. It's every workshop. I don't like that way my voice is recorded. But at some point, the ownership gets there and there's a kind of empowerment around that. It's really key. You know, choosing whether you're going to use photographs or you're going to just film in your apartment or in your neighborhood, what do you use? We navigate that and help people make decisions around. I won't go into that because every story is different. Some people just use still photographs. It's what they have. It's what they have on their phone. It's the way they feel most comfortable is just looking at photographs. And working with video is a slightly different animal, but people are exploring that in our workshops now. And then assembling, putting it together, and just testing the waters. It's like an organic, or we don't do any formal foundation of filmmaking. People have to experiment and make assessments themselves. A key thing is like, oh, my story sounds so like a slideshow. It looks like a slideshow. And then we talk about what makes something visual look like a slideshow. And usually it's because every noun, they show that noun. They're very explicit, or they try to edit to the writing structure. Every time they change a sentence, they change a photograph. And so we impart these other ideas of subtly around pace and economy and rhythm, of course, all coming from the voice, not the words so much as how the voice is expressing and the phrasing and the way your own voice has flow and rhythm and movement. And once people are editing to that, it's more intimate in the way that they're making their film, their little story, because they're in tune to their own voice, and the material they are choosing makes sense given what they're saying and how they're saying it. So all that is really fascinating to watch people get to that. And then they put together. So it's an organic trial and error, learning a software as we go, which is, I won't show that movie, but I'll leave it. Which is, we use a cloud-based editor. This isn't a plug for WeVideo. There's many out there. We've been using them now for, gosh, ever since they were in the Bay Area, almost 15 years ago now. I've been making online workshops using WeVideo. We like it because it's powerful, meaning it feels like an editor, yet it's intuitive. It's not jargonistic. It's made for teachers that teach, middle schoolers all the way to, 80-year-olds that want to explore this, right? It as much as technology can be intimidating, this is one of the most least intimidating platforms I've come across. And we make sure people feel comfortable in that space, and we give extra time for people to navigate the digital video editing process. I'm going to wrap it up here. Maybe we'll go back I think I do have time for some Q&A. I'd be remiss from people like Marianne, who do as program director. We do a lot of work, and Marianne has been doing, actually, even as through the pandemic, as we started to do more in person, she's been on the road, and she's heading back to North Carolina to work with young Appalachia girls, I believe, coming up here this month. So it's so nice to have Marianne, even though I know she's about to hit the road. But we also, we have these workshops that people explore for themselves. It's our public workshops. You come, you make a story. I'm one of the lead facilitators of the public workshops. That's my sort of program areas. And we have different iterations, right? But the foundation course, the digital storytelling course, is where everybody seems to want to start. And we do that, but we also do work programmatically. I mean, I just finished doing my first in-person workshop in over 2 years with some 10th graders around mental health in high school, not even post-pandemic. It was really interesting. It was an after-school program. It was run through a small university up in Vallejo. And it was really interesting to work in that space with people. And it doesn't fit exactly the model of our regular workshop. So the programmatic custom work is in working with a client and what outcomes and who's in the room and how does it look like, how much time is it, and how much is the budget and all that. Mm-hmm. Marianne, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, sure. For custom clients, we often start with, what are your goals and what is it you're trying to accomplish? With what is your audience, who are your participants, what are your ultimate goals? And then normally what I do is I'll meet with you to talk about those things, and then send you a list of options of ways to best address those goals and meet your needs, with recommendations. But then I also include the budget information too, and you know that better than we do. So there's adjusting, of course, that happens around budget and goals and all of that. So, yeah.
As I say, there's all sorts of number of workshops, but the online digital storytelling workshop is our sort of main sort of foundational course. We're starting to do a few in person, mostly down in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where Joe Lambert is now. He moved from the Bay Area, and he's doing there. He has a nice sort of compound commons. We have a workshop space here in Berkeley, but we're not seeing people ready to jump on an airplane and get a hotel room.
Yeah.
And the online workshops have been wonderful in all of a sudden opening up the world to us. We've always had international presence, but it's just fascinating. I mean, I have people from Sweden and I think someone from Japan in my workshop right now that's ongoing, right? So there's completely different time zones, which is a little unnerving for me in trying to help choose one-on-one, what I call office hours, but fascinating anyways. If you want, this looks like a plug, but it's a really good book. We use it. I use it all the time. I'm using it in my certificate program, which I'm about to go on to teach here in 5 minutes. So if you are interested in sort of where digital storytelling came from and best practices. It's got some great interviews with practitioners from public health to organizational storytelling. It's all sort of captured in this book. So I recommend it. That's it. I'm going to leave it open for a few minutes of questions before we have to go, because it's rare that I finish on time. So I'm going to take that as a win and see if there's any questions that popped up. If not, feel free to leave. I will be sending out a recording, the slide deck, links to the stories, including the one we didn't see. Please stay in communication with myself and or Marianne on any questions you have about the work we do or the work you're trying to do and how we can support it. There'll also be some resource materials, as I said, the ethical framework being a key one that you're welcome to adapt and take forward. That's it from the formal presentation, but I'll leave it open for some questions. What comes next after this intro? You must take a workshop with us. It really is just, we, just like me, I heard about it through someone passing through. They gave me a quick little intro about a project with BBC in Wales that Story Center, or back then it was Center for Digital Storytelling, had facilitated. And I took a workshop. And it was all from that workshop and the experience of making my own story that I was able to sort of understand how I needed to move that better to do, if I wanted to do work in Indigenous communities in Canada's far north, which I ended up doing, but I couldn't do it without actually having the experience of making my own story and going through the process itself. So really that's it. Marianne's put a,
so Robert, I'm trying to
ahead.
decide if I want to go to the in-person workshops, which obviously New Mexico, why not, right? But
You're close
budget, travel, all of that. Just weighing the options between doing the online series instead. I'm just trying to think of like, what's the best choice? Like, does it appeal to a certain personality or learning style? Is there noted difference obvious than, the platform?
I always thought that the online would be a lesser experience. You miss the lunch breaks and the coffee breaks and the sort of like breathing the same air when it was, we all felt that was a good thing. Right. There's just something about in person around storytelling. It's hard to capture, but I'm a convert. I've been doing this now. I'm a convert. The Zoom is really interesting. People, and I'm not saying it's part of his budget. It's much more affordable. And the outcomes are the same in the sense of what you create. And if you don't know the in-person, it feels community. You feel like you're able to share. And it's just been a wonderful experience. And people come to the class, say, this is the best online experience I've ever had. And that's not just to say, but most of our Zoom is around work, problem solving, and budgetary stuff, or maybe it's a little book club, but it's just chitty chat. This is a combination of gathering of people that eventually get invested in your own process and helping you through it. Can
I just say a couple of things? That if you're doing the in-person workshop, as Rob said, it's 3 consecutive days, you're immersed in it. So you are 100% in the story. If you do it online, it's 2 hours. Rob does it over 6 weeks. If we do a custom workshop, it could be 2 sessions a week over 3 weeks, but 6 sessions. And you have time in between, which can be good if you're that kind of person who needs a chance to let the ideas marinate, or you might be the kind of person who really needs to be immersed and go through it really quickly. So to me, that's sort of the difference. But in terms of the bonding and the group experience, I was completely surprised how much that happens online. I didn't think it would be true. And I'm amazed. I thought I would be going into that kicking and screaming, and I absolutely love it. And I love the idea that you get so many people from so many different places in the same quote room to share their lived experiences.
That's super helpful. Yeah. And I wouldn't expect any less from this particular topic as far as online implementation.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not accounting. So thank you. I appreciate the advice.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. I unfortunately have to run.
Yeah.
Please stay in touch. Send us an email if you have other questions that didn't get covered. We didn't get a chance to answer. The conversation continues. Hopefully the journey for you continues. And we see you at some point in the workshop, whether it's online or in person.
Yep. And we'll send the presentation and the video.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.